We've just watched Lily Topples the World. We have the director, Jeremy Workman. I'm Ted Fisher. I teach video in Cleveland, Mississippi at Delta State University. And I come today with a number of questions about the film, having seen it a few times with my students. And I bring a couple of questions they had too, which I'll definitely throw your direction. But let's start with this, Jeremy. We're at the end of the film. What is it you're hoping as this gets past the credits and rolls? What mood do you hope your viewer is in right now after having seen Lily and met that world and gone through her
Yeah,
experience?
I guess just, just feeling like, wow, they've really dug into this world and seen some sort of, world that they never expected to see, but also some larger themes of discovering your passion and finding what, makes you excited as a person, as an artist, as a creator, and sort of it being something where you kind of realize that that's what kind of makes you you. And I think that was what really excited me about this story, was that it wasn't just about this great amazing domino artist, but it had sort of bigger themes about sort of finding your passion in a way.
I watched it with a lot of people who are the same age as Lily, and at a time when people were a little stressed, having a hard time with life in general. And I looked around and no one really looked away for the entire length of the film. They were enwrapped in it. They were relating to it. I think some saw themselves in it. But I have to confess, I also felt a little bit of a connection to Lily. I felt like I love any film that's about somebody doing something creative and trying to keep that going. And in the film, we see an interesting moment. How does this person build a career? How does somebody make knocking dominoes over into a life? So can you go back in time a little bit and take us to maybe the first few times you met Lily and how you figured out what Lily was all about?
Yeah, and I think that it's a neat point you raised, because definitely from my approach, I was absolutely trying to think about how this could be a documentary for a very wide audience, a big demographic, for that maybe people in the audience and your students as well, maybe they don't gravitate towards documentaries when they're scanning through, streaming services, but that this might be a little bit of a way for them to discover documentaries and realize, like, wow, there's some really cool nonfiction stuff out there and really neat people out there. So it was definitely on my mind, like when I was making the movie, about trying to think about that audience. And I really did see how Lily was, obviously she's, the world's most greatest domino toppler. So it's so niche. It's so specific. So you hear that, you're like, okay, well, that's not something I could relate to. But yet there's something also very universal about her, especially for a lot of the younger audience, or I would say younger being Gen Z and even millennials, that just, they see in her a lot of common traits. They see how young people in that age have become creators, are taking their own sort of path to what they want to do, are discovering their own path through life, through their art. And I saw in Lily, a very universal story that I did feel like really connected with a whole kind of demographic that was sort of hasn't really seen a lot of, hasn't had a lot of documentaries for them. So I appreciate you mentioning that. As far as the breakdown of like how it all happened, I was a fan of Lily's first. Before there was even an idea to do a documentary, I was a fan of hers. And I was just like a lot of people. I was a subscriber of hers. I loved her videos. I was kind of enamored with the domino community on YouTube and online. It was something that I was often watching and really appreciating and just being like, wow, it's totally incredible what's going on with these creators online. And I'm really interested in artists who are passionate about what they do. And it just kind of led me to say, like, hey, I wonder if there's a documentary here. I didn't know Lily before we started this movie. So that's a question that comes up, is like, well, you must have known Lily and you guys kind of came up with this idea of doing a documentary. I didn't. I had just finished a previous documentary, and I was just found myself really intrigued by her and her story. And then I got to meet her. And, at that point, when I met her, I was thinking there could be a documentary, but there was nobody had said, oh, we want you to go make a documentary. So it was a little bit about, could this be? And then I met her, and then we talked about it, and then we decided, hey, why don't we try to see if there's something here to do? And I shot a little bit at the beginning. I know where there's a number of the people watching are, interested in filmmaking. So what I did is I shot for a couple months, and then we started to decide, okay, was there enough here to kind of make a movie? And then from there, it just went off.
One of the surprises for me is exactly what you just discussed. The fact that beyond somebody's story, trying to go from a little bit of internet fame to a full career, there is this sideline of mediation in here that's pretty amazing. That as people popped in along her adventure, my students gasped as if the biggest box office star had appeared. Someone they know very well from constant YouTube or other means. And with your reveals behind the scenes and with some of the sort of strategizing that happens on some of these, we get a glimpse not just of the Domino's world, but of this mediated YouTube world. Lily herself makes videos. There's this sophistication and sometimes some complications because the end product's going to YouTube and out to the world, and we're building a sort of identity. So were you already very familiar with Lily as someone in that world of YouTube famous, of YouTubers, people other than we treat? If, for example, you'd covered a painter, we probably wouldn't be talking about which video channel she got on. We'd be talking about other things. But here, that became a central focus, building that audience, figuring out who you are, communicating every day. There's a moment where a young guy comes up and is in awe of Lily, even shaking a bit, as if it was the biggest pop star he ever met, and he's thrilled to then join channels up a little bit and be on for a second. And I couldn't help but think of some of the fame documentaries going all the way back to, say, Paul Anka in Lonely Boy in the 60s, and how documentaries deal with fame. So what in your mind did Lily want to show you from this world? I mean, there's a huge audience in Toppling Dominoes, which surprises some people. There's a connection to all these other people who wanted to put Domino's in the map, all the people who become her crew. And then there's this connection to all the people out there who are YouTube famous already, who bring her on as a guest or have a special sort of setup with her or other things. So take us through that. How did this world of fame change over the time you're doing the film? I think Lily only got more famous, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's such an interesting question, and it's such a big part of the movie, and it's so interesting when you start looking at younger creators, people in 20s and under, who I'm sure you deal with all the time, where you are. They have a very different attitude to being to making their own material, to being creators, and YouTube has really opened up this world to them to really put their stuff out there in a way that was never an option for older generations, even a few years older than them. So it was something that I was super interested from the get-go. This is a portrait of an artist. And as you've said, we've all seen documentaries that are portraits of artists. We've all seen documentaries that are about famous people, and famous icons, young icons. But we are only now starting to sort of discover people who are artists on, as social media stars, artists as creators. And that was really something that I thought was so interesting with Lily's story, that, yeah, there's all these interesting subtexts and talking points. She's adopted, she's was a little bit of an awkward girl growing up, that we get, that we understand her story with her family, that she finds this passion through dominoes and then becomes this incredible domino artist. But what really struck me was how she had found not just fame, but she had found her community through this online resource, and being able to make her videos and post them to this world and find that community and find her people was something that I thought was just so interesting. So what was, for me as a filmmaker, what started as a portrait of an artist quickly evolved into almost like a coming of age movie, that we're watching Lily kind of come of age as a person, not just as an artist, through this whole medium of her dominoes and YouTube. But to echo your question, I was super interested in seeing that world come alive. I was hearing from Lily that, she would do these like YouTube collaborations, and suddenly, she would talk about connecting with these big YouTubers, the biggest, and even since the documentary, has a viral video with Mark Rober that had 20 million views, so I was really interested what that world is and how it's a very different world than what we're used to. It's a different world that documentaries are showing. And it very much said to me, like, okay, this is going to have to be, what we would call maybe like a ride along documentary, that we're just going to follow Lily along as we sort of see her in all these different capacities. She's doing a collab with Casey Neistat. She's doing a big piece for The Tonight Show that's really for Jimmy Fallon's YouTube. She's sort of meeting up YouTubers, that the world of YouTube interviews, and there's this whole sort of ecosystem. And that was super interesting to me. As far as like specifics, when I started, Lily was kind of famous, and it was in some ways a great place to start, because the documentary really coincided with her fame like skyrocketing. And she becomes, I filmed the movie for nearly 3 years, and I followed her wherever she went. That's where I was. If she said, hey, I'm going to Paris to do a collaboration, I was like, okay, I'll be right next to you. If she was like, I'm going to California, I'm doing a commercial, I'll be there right next to you. And so she was already a little famous. She was quite famous. She had 1 million subscribers. By the time we finished the movie, she's now at about 3.5 million. So it's kind of tripled in a way, but it also really coincided with all this incredible stuff happening for her. And I think just, it's really interesting how celebrity is now. And I think also Lily's story reflects that as well a little bit, that, a lot of the audience that might be watching this movie and really responding to it, they have a very different relationship with celebrities than we did, and that older people do, that it's something that they're much more connected to them, and it's all through these platforms. So that was, as you brought up, that fan who was just so, is treating her like a pop star. He's treating her like she's the biggest, star in the world, but he's connecting with her through all this sort of social media. And that was something that was really new to me and really interesting.
Now, you mentioned how long it took you to film this, and I imagine you ended up with a lot of hours of footage. We can go into that in a second, but I want to jump forward to the editing process. Did you, as you were going through this, immediately know where this was headed? Did this get discovered in the edit? And from that, tell us how you worked with, I think you had a couple of assistant editors. You have a lot of background in editing. How you worked through forming this story. So take us back. How much did you end up actually filming? How many hours?
Yeah, I mean, just I filmed probably over 500 hours, which is quite a lot. And I also had access to all of Lily's footage from her incredible, amount of personal footage, that she had been filming for years, really. I also had all these YouTube videos. I also had all this media where she would appear on stuff. So, all told, I had hundreds of hours of footage. And so how do you turn that into a movie? How do you turn that into a movie that you could say like, well, it doesn't, we've seen documentaries that are about competitions, or we've seen documentaries that are about, somebody fighting, some big thing. Maybe they're fighting a disease or fighting for a cause. This really wasn't any of that, right? It was just following her. So it comes back to what I was saying a little earlier, where I realized that the movie was a coming of age movie, right? Well, what's that? Like, what's a coming of age movie? It's like, okay, we've all seen coming of age movies. We've all seen Lady Bird or a movie like that, where we sort of just follow a young person and and as they kind of become who they are. So once I realized that that was the approach, that was the plan of this movie, and I realized that pretty early. One of the ways that I realized that was the first stuff that I filmed was Lily in college. And it's those scenes like very early in the movie where she is really, she's really sad that she's going to leave college because she finally found her friends, and she's crying because she had the interview that I filmed where she cries in college because she's going to drop out was the first day of filming. And at that point I realized, wow, this isn't just a story of this quirky artist who's doing domino artist. This is a story about this girl who's facing these issues that we're all facing. We're not all dropping out of college, but we're all facing like these big questions about what to do with our lives, what to do with our careers. Do we take this path? Do we take that path? And once I realized that, I was like, okay, well, this is a movie about that. It's a movie about following your path. Once I realized that, I was like, okay, well, how do you turn that into a movie? How do you edit that to get to your question? How do you edit a movie about following your path? Well, you go on the path, and you really film a lot of that journey and you watch it in real time, right? That's something I also try to do as a filmmaker. I try to really put the audience in places in real time, in present tense, so that they feel like they're on those paths with the main person. And I just realized that, okay, that's kind of what it's going to be. It's going to be this sort of ride along. And, people maybe in the audience, they watch that documentary about Billie Eilish. That's a ride along too. We follow along with her. So it's kind of the same kind of thing. I wanted to kind of have the audience sort of follow along and experience what it was like to be in her shoes. And then, of course, there were these little details, like, of course, she gets her own, domino line. And I realized that was going to be such a key part of the story. And then I built the movie sort of around that. So very, very hard to edit, as you said, as you noted. A lot of footage, and just trying to figure out the through line was really difficult. But I just kind of sat down and worked through it and did that classic thing where I had a lot of note cards for scenes. In fact, here you go. This was the movie. These were note cards, and I just went through them point by point. Here's Casey Neistat. It'd be like a scene, and I would put them in the order just like you would see a lot of filmmakers do. And I realized like I was able with that to kind of put together the movie in a way that I felt would really be great for an audience.
And I think we have 2 assistant editors in the credits, and
Yeah.
I push my students to consider that as a way into the industry or some part of the industry. How did you work with those 2 people? I do hear the idea in your head, and you are the author of it, but were they used as a kind of brute force? Let's deal with 500 hours of footage,
Yes.
or tell us
Yes.
about that. Yeah.
So I have 2 assistant editors that work closely with me. They've been with me for one has been with me now for 3 films. We're starting up a new one now. And one is one's a guy, one's a girl, and they're both awesome. And they know how to like sort of process through a lot of material. They know what I'm looking for. So, part of my strategy when I'm shooting documentaries is to shoot a lot of footage. It's not just that, oh, look at all this awesome stuff Lily is doing. But part of the actual strategy to make everybody relaxed on camera is just to shoot a lot of footage. Even somebody like Lily, who is so used to cameras, was often awkward and self-conscious around my camera. It's just what's going to happen. You put a big camera in front of people, they're going to start feeling it. So one of my strategies for dealing with that is to shoot a lot of footage. And after a while, subjects forget about the camera. After a while, after a couple of days, they're just like, okay, yeah, it's more filming. And I felt that was really a great way through this movie as well. So what I do is I shoot a lot of footage, and then it goes in raw form to my assistant editors. My assistant editors, by the way, for everybody watching, they're like 21, 22, 23 years old. They're not these sort of seasoned professionals that live in Hollywood. They're people that just right out of film school. I think one of them didn't even go to film school. They're just people that understand, that learned how to use the system and Premiere and being able to sort of work through them. And they go through my footage, and then they create selects for me. And then from there, I start, blasting through and figuring out how to edit it. So it is really a key part of my process, shooting a lot of footage, having a lot of editors go through it, and then working through that material.
The family story is inherent in everything here. It's kind of the background to everything in this, but that did mean you working with Lily's father and finding out more and more about her background and the family. And I think that's one of the sort of the main formal interviews we have in the film, and a little bit of section where he pops in and explains some things to us and so on. Can you talk about your relationship to the family? Because they certainly wanted to be involved, certainly wanted this story out there. But I also imagine someone with a 20-year-old daughter has a lot of things they're concerned about with the future of that daughter and where things are. How was your relationship with getting this family story told in an honest way?
Yeah, it was definitely it was a tricky part. As a filmmaker, you're always navigating, kind of tricky terrain. And that was one of them. That was like, on one hand, it's this incredible story, where, Lily was abandoned as a 1-year-old in China, and this family from New England, from New Hampshire, decides that they're going to take her, and regardless of anything. And it was this really heartfelt, emotional, and inspirational story. And yet they're also very protective of her, and they're very careful about her in terms of how the world is kind of looking at her and seeing her. And her father, who's great, but he's very involved in her career. So it just became about really seeing the family as collaborators with me, that we were all sort of making this movie together, that I would often show Lily and the family, cuts of the movie, because I also knew that it was so important for me to get into events. I would say to Lily's father, hey, they would say to me, hey, Lily's going to be on the Today Show. And I'd say, great, get me in there. And they'd say, oh, that's going to be impossible. The Today Show doesn't want Lily's documentary with them. And I'd say, okay, yeah, figure it out. I got to get in there. And they would figure it out so that I could be suddenly on set of the Today Show or the Tonight Show or these commercials, or on set of with Lego, just so many places where they were so instrumental, the family, in helping me get into these locations. So it's just sort of part of, being a filmmaker, being a documentary filmmaker, is working through all the relationships and making sure that everybody feels that they're part of the same team, and that, you're making the same movie. That's very important.
Now, Lily is in the film very clearly media savvy, not just in the sense of fame, but in how to make a video and how to present her dominoes and how to make a piece of art out of this, and seems to grow during the film, becomes more and more sophisticated in that aspect. Is Lily sliding towards making films, or is this dominoes and more dominoes, or where did you leave Lily in the sense of this experience? Now that maybe Lily sees herself on screen in front of an audience, does Lily want to make the next film?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I know that she was really, the documentary was a really interesting experience for her. That much I know. She talks about it a lot in interviews, and she talks about how different it was as well to her filming. That her filming, when she does her domino videos on YouTube, it's so strategic. It's so like, almost like clinical, like cameras here, camera there, camera there. Everything is so exacting and precision, has so much precision. But with the documentary, it's a lot more chaotic. It's a lot more messy. There's cameras everywhere and you're following, and things don't always go as you hope. So I think that was very eye-opening to her. And I think she really did like the process. I don't know if she's sort of saying to herself, oh, I want to do short form or long form documentaries now. I think she loves just doing YouTube, right? But I think it's really opened her eyes about vlogging more, doing more profile pieces, more stuff that's about her, and even as the movie has come out, she's done more and more YouTube about like how she is as a person, how she feels, kind of first person vlogging, more vlogging stuff than just domino videos. So I think that's pretty neat. I can't say for sure what, where she's going to go, but she's, super talented. And I could see her being able to kind of direct commercials if she wants in the future. She's really, really good with a camera, and it was interesting for me because I've made documentaries on artists. I've even made documentaries on filmmakers, but it was also, for me, I had to kind of realize like, this was also a documentary on a filmmaker, and that, yeah, it's a different kind of filmmaker. But the same idea of doing a documentary on, I don't know, David Fincher or something like that, it would be the sort of the same approach to doing a documentary on a YouTuber. You have to think about them as filmmakers. And that was very important as well.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to one last question for you, but I do want to shout out our sponsors for 1 second here. I want to mention that the Southern Circuit screenings, where we've seen this film, are funded in part by a grant from South Arts, a regional arts organization, in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts. For more information about the Southern Circuit and South Arts, please visit www.southarts.org/Southern Circuit. Final question, now that we've thanked our sponsors. You have been involved in documentary as your main, as far as I can see, your main area of filmmaking for a long time. Where are you going next? And does the current set of challenges we all face, everything from pandemics to economics, does that change what you're going to do? Where are you going next? I know this film's just starting to make its rounds in the world, but where in your mind do you think you're going? And is it changed a little from where we might have expected?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, obviously with the pandemic and how things are changing. But, I think that at my core, first of all, I love nonfiction filmmaking. I love documentary filmmaking. I love, as you could tell, I love editing, so all these things are things that really excite me. And I also love, these really, there's so many interesting, amazing characters out there. So I don't feel like I'm ever going to exhaust possibilities of making documentaries. What is exciting for me isn't so much the problems with where we are in production, but the possibilities. That's really exciting for me, that cameras are just getting better and better and lighter, and editing systems are easier to operate, and you could have incredible effects and do all kinds of incredible, production in ways that you could never dream of a few years ago. So that continues to excite me. So I think I'm doing at least 1 and maybe 2 features starting up soon, both documentaries. And it's sort of the same approach. It's the technology has also allowed me to be a little bit more of what, like a one person production crew, one man band a little bit. I could shoot. I'm not the world's greatest shooter, but I shot a lot of this movie. And I could shoot most of the movies that I'm working on and then bring on cinematographers as I need, and also be able to edit them on my own. So in some ways, there's this incredible possibility of making movies in the future. And though things have changed so much just recently, there's still so much possibility. There's so many stories, and there's such great opportunities to do documentaries. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm going to continue probably in those paths.
Thank you so much. I think we're about the end of our time. Any final comment on what you think we should take away from this film? I mean, I was so happy to have a film that was cheery, and that I felt youthful energy, and I felt a little bit of happiness watching in a really tough time. What would you hope that we leave with?
Yeah, it might just be that, we've watched, there's so many documentaries that sort of tell us that the world is terrible and that people are terrible and that life is horrible. And, there's also a lot of documentaries that, they feel a little bit more like maybe like journalistic magazine articles, like something you would read in school about some topic. And I think that one of the big takeaways that I hope people get is not just seeing this cool movie about this interesting young woman, but also that this idea that documentaries can be a lot of different things. They could focus on characters in different ways, in different places. They don't all have to be, stories of crisis. They could be stories of success, and that's a great experience for people watching. That if we think about movies, the kinds of movies that we watch that are fiction movies, narrative movies, scripted movies, the kind of movies that you go to the movie theaters and see, documentaries can sort of be every bit as that. So I sort of think about that a lot when I'm making my movies. I look for ways for my documentaries to be entertaining and positive and audience friendly, all of those things, which I think are great. I love going to the movies. I grew up going to the movies, and I want to bring that to documentary as well. So, I think that your point is kind of what was my point in a way. And I'm glad that the movie has been a little bit, a little ray of sunshine for some people who might be struggling or might be thinking about what their own decisions in life, or some of the challenges that they're facing about what they want to do, and really just see it as a source of inspiration to kind of follow their dreams a little bit.
On that note, I think we'll end our conversation. Great speaking to you. Thank you for the film. And if you run into Lily, tell her thank you for my students. They
Absolutely.
stayed.
Thanks for the interview, Ted. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. My students stayed past the end of class to watch the last bit of this, which is more or less the highest level of compliment. So
Oh, awesome.
thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.